What introverts took for granted were all absolutely strengths of a great leader. Introverts, just like extroverts, love people. Has nothing to do with that. Most of our listeners probably know that the meetings that we go to, really the meeting takes place before the meeting. If you hear it in your head 2 or 3 times, it means you need to. When an introvert will go on and on and on talking about something that they're passionate. We couldn't get them to shut. It starts with them, right? Know thyself.
Super excited today, guys. I have somebody that I've been wanting to interview for years, and it's a book that changed my life. I didn't know that I could be a leader when I was younger. And this book came out in 2009, but there's a 3rd edition that's coming out, and we want you to pre-order that right now. It's called The Introverted Leader. And I am a proud introverted leader, and we're going to get in today on what the book is called, The Introverted Leader, Building on Your Quiet Strength. Dr. Jennifer B. Kahnweiler, she's a global powerhouse, and she's been shattering these stereotypes for introverts for decades. There's packed in this book 4-piece process that we're going to get into in detail so that you're going to come away with a lot of practical information on how you can be a leader as an introvert. And it's the ultimate, I believe, playbook for introverts to dominate in an extrovert's world. And also, we're going to get into hybrid workplaces and the technical aspects of that. Thank you, Jennifer, for being on the podcast today.
Jason, it's my pleasure. It's a thrill to be with you.
Yeah, when I first read your book, I had questions. I was number one, and I had shared this with you before, but I was number one on the sales side of things. And I was using my introvert to do well in sales, but I did not think that I could be, as an introvert, that I could be a leader. And I know what you wrote in the book, Quiet Strengths. And a lot of times when we see extroverts, they're like this loud strength. What did you mean in the title when you said quiet strength?
Well, Jason, as I got to know introverts in the work that I was doing and the research I continue to pursue, it was just apparent that what introverts took for granted, the ability to listen, the ability to prepare, or the natural propensity to always be prepared as much as they could be, the taking quiet time, the just deep reflection and deep thinking were all absolutely strengths of a great leader. In fact, when I would talk with people about who their favorite manager was or their team lead, they would describe somebody who had those strengths. So that's what I was trying to work on or to get the message out about when I wrote the 1st edition of The Introverted Leader, because I was working with so many clients who were not recognizing the tremendous power that they had, that they were using, like yourself, and having success with, but just weren't seeing themselves as really powerful and really able to step into that role and embrace it.
What do you think, going with that thread, what do you think the most common misconception about introverted leaders? And how can we as introverts challenge it?
Well, I think what people in general think, Jason, as being an introvert, we still fight this bias, that's all over, particularly our Western society. It's changing, thank God. But, many people think that introverts and introverted leaders really don't want to be with people. Like they would rather just hide
right.
or run into their office and just come out when they have to. And I guess to a certain extent, that's sometimes true, but it's not really the truth that we want to embrace. And that is that introverts, just like extroverts, love people. Has nothing to do with that. It's really about how much time and stimulation you can take, how much recharge you need. That's the key theme about most introverts will tell you, and you can probably validate this, that you need that time to decompress. But that has nothing to do with whether or not you like people. And I think that introverts have always gotten this bad rap. You used to see people be interviewed on the news after, let's say, there was a serial murder or something, and they would interview the neighbors. They said, "Oh, he was an introvert. He kept to himself." But that kind of I'm exaggerating, but that happens. That we're still fighting those kind of beliefs that introverts are not people. And there's nothing that could be further from the truth.
I love that. And one of the things that and I want to be real practical for everyone, and so I'm going to jump right in with this. Your book talks about the room's full of extroverts. Me as a CMO, a chief marketing officer, I'm in a room full of extroverts. How can introverted leaders effectively communicate their ideas when you're in a room full of all those extroverts?
Well, as we know, Jason, having been in the workplace, I've been in a little bit longer than you, I'm sure, or a lot longer. But we know, and most of our listeners probably know that the meetings that we go to, really the meeting takes place before the meeting, right? So what introverts do really well when they're effective in meetings is a couple things. One is that they make sure they know what's going to be addressed in the meeting and push for agendas if there isn't one. A lot of extroverts say, well, we're just going to get in there and talk. We're going to wing it. That's like the worst thing for an introvert, right? So then you all can kind of think about what is my one or two points that I want to make sure that I get across. Okay, so having that preparation also gives you the confidence when you might have to make a hand sign to somebody or ask a buddy in the meeting to kind of pitch the ball to you even beforehand, to say to them, I want to bring up some points. So if you see everybody talking over each other, make sure you bring me in. There's a lot of techniques that you can use actually before the meeting. And so I think that's really critical. But I also think that a lot of the decisions get made not only before the meeting, but also after the meeting. So if things come up that you didn't get to address, which can happen, right? That you make sure that within a very short period of time, you give yourself maybe even a couple of hours, you then write down. And now with AI, it's really good to have that ability, which we wouldn't have had a few years ago, to summarize the meeting and then actually pick out points that you want to then jump onto and put your POV in, your point of view. So I think there's ways to bookend it, before the meeting, during the meeting, certainly talk, and then after the meeting. There's also a lot of techniques that introverts leaders have shared with me that they use. Like Pat Waters is somebody as an HR leader who I always love getting ideas from Pat. And she said one of the things that she does is self-monitor, and she's coached other introverts to do this. And that is, if you have an idea in your head and you're kind of thinking about, well, maybe I shouldn't say this, you're kind of forming it perfectly, or you're trying to just get it out there. If you hear it in your head 2 or 3 times, it means you need. I think also if the organization is very, skewed towards sort of pandemonium, if you will. And I'm not putting down, enthusiasm. There's a lot of times extroverts that think through their mouth, right? So they're talking and they're talking. But there is something to be said, isn't there, for good facilitation? So I think sometimes we, and introverts included, need to push back on leaders who are letting the meeting get out of control. Because that is not a conducive environment to hear from, could be half your group, right, who is not speaking up because either they're intimidated or they just, not feeling that there's space. So putting in some structured techniques where we go around, hear from each person, we build that into the way we get the meeting going and working well. It's like, fine-tuning a car. You can't just have it go all over the place. You have to have some direction. You have to have some focus. And I have seen meetings really fall apart. We probably all have, when the leader lets it be taken over. Mm-hmm. But I'm laughing, but that can happen. Have you noticed that with marketing? That can happen a lot with the enthusiasm.
Yes, 100%. One of the things that your book taught me that is so powerful, and I want introvert leaders to get this, especially when it comes to meetings, is most extroverts, like you said, wing it almost all the time. 90% of a meeting that you walk into, if it's full of extroverts, they're all winging it. So when I come in, one of your 4 Ps, when I come in prepared, and I understand that me being prepared is my superpower, they always will look to me, especially being quiet, they'll look to me for the strategy or the wisdom. I will be instantly prepared, ready to go, and they're usually impressed by that. So depending on what I'm saying, but if I'm prepared and I'm confident in my preparation, if I prepared enough, then I feel confident as an introvert. Then when I step into the room, who knows where the agenda goes, but as long as I know beforehand, like you said, I'm doing all those, maybe I'm meeting with somebody beforehand, getting everything pre-done, then I know that I'm ready, I'm prepared. I've got my superpower, and they're not even thinking about it. They're just thinking about going to have drinks after lunch or, whatever, as they're running their mouth. If that makes sense.
Be careful, though. I'll bring the extrovert side into it. They also can bring up ideas that you might, as an introvert, not have thought about in your careful preparation. So that's where both of us bring strengths, right? So I think the other way that introverts can leverage what they do well is because you're prepared, you then aren't worrying that you didn't do the preparation, so you couldn't be present. That's the second P we talk about, right? Preparation. being present, what does that allow you to do? I think about, I'm going to jump out of the meeting room for a minute. And when I was first learning to do speaking and training, I would get it. I was over-prepared and, of course, naturally anxious when I was teaching something I didn't really know too well, right? So then I would not be able to be present and with the group. And I was focused too much on the plan, on my lesson plan for the day, right? And that totally took me away from doing what I needed to do and connecting with the group. And it's the same with meetings. If we're just focused on well, that's what we were going to talk about, and now you're veering off. Well, maybe the veering off could sometimes be just the road you need to go down, right? You get that counterintuitive idea that somebody who is an extrovert maybe thought of because they think through their mouth, right? So you as an introvert can then take that in and be with it. So because you've done your preparations, say that there's both sides to it,
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I want to shift, because you mentioned communication, I think it's really important, and I had to learn this from your book. I thought that because you learn and you watch other extroverts as leaders, so I thought having an open door policy was really good. And then my energy and burnout would happen because I had so many social interactions. They were constantly coming into my office, as a new leader, being in middle management. It was just constant interruptions. In the end of the day, my energy and burnout was through the roof, and I couldn't even go work out like I wanted to, or wasn't engaging with my family. What strategies can introvert leaders use to manage that?
Well, it's really partly time management. Is how do we allow for ourselves to also do self-care? And so many leaders would talk to me about really blocking off their calendar at certain points. Now with an open office, there's other ways people do it. They have signals. If you're lucky enough to have somebody in your team who can play the quarterback, that helps as well. But I think we have tools now to really block off on our calendar, making sure that all those minutes are not open. I think that you talk about working out too. A lot of what the introverted leaders told me is that they would take walks or get away, if particularly now coming back to the office a lot more, although we also do it remote, to also take care of that, kind of stress release and also a little exercise, but getting away from people. So I think it's really intentional that we tend to not want to be reactive in that situation, but be proactive and know what our levels are. At the other extreme, I had leaders who I talk with who really had to learn how to be more people engaging at certain times. They were all about getting the work done, but they didn't realize the value in having some of those spontaneous conversations. And I think now that we are going back, a lot of people are going back to the office, they're going to start to see some of that thing that people have been expressing in some of our research that they missed, which was, walking to the coffee station with somebody outside of your team. So you're kind of learning what other people are doing in the organization. So we need to make time for that too. But to your point, if you're constantly getting people coming in, that's obviously sounds like it burnt you out, and it burns out a lot of introverts for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think a lot of people, like you're just saying, and I think it's important, on the flip side of this, not to just defend introverts all the time. Like you said, we have to be proactive in having those conversations, at whether it's coffee or whatever, and not, because I think we can use Zoom, work at home. We can use all these as an excuse to just be in our cave or withdraw like a turtle, in our shell. What are some of the things that you as that introverts need to work on, to make sure that they're communicating properly with, not just with those around them, or having conversations, or some of the things that they can practice with strangers, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I think more and more we're seeing now the value, and the research is supporting this in our endorphins, whether we're introvert or extrovert, having conversations with people, interacting with people, even if they're kind of superficial, with the barista in the coffee shop. There is research that says, or you're in an elevator, you're talking to somebody. We're always on our phones, right? So being cognizant of just keeping that in practice, keeping it lubricated. That's what I'm going to say. The art of conversation. Right. We really all got away from that. It wasn't just introverts. Through COVID and the effects of that, of not just being out in the world. So I think that being intentional about that. I think one of the things that a caveat for a lot of my introverted clients is they tend sometimes to forget that what really makes work is relationships. How do we get it done is through other people.
Yes.
Right? It's through other people. It's not just the tasks. And so to that, what we need to do is make sure that we, again, schedule, and introverts are good with planning this, one-on-ones, which is another strength you have, like calling people, which a lot of us have forgotten to do, or even making it, if we can, an in-person connection with people we haven't in a while, whether they be past clients, maybe people that we have in our network. There's something called the care and feeding of your network, that you don't want to just be the person that's just reaching out to people when you need a new opportunity or new job. How do we keep that network alive and vibrant with people that are enriching us, that are giving us access to more influential people? It doesn't just happen by magic, but I think introverts can do that, and they tend to sometimes avoid that because they just don't, doesn't sound like fun, right? It doesn't sound like fun. Going to a networking event doesn't sound like fun. But if you have some structure, if you know, okay, let's say if you're going to a professional group meeting, as an example, where you're going to do a live thing, you put some parameters that are doable for you. Maybe you come early, you offer to help out at the table, you give yourself a certain amount of time to be there. You set an internal goal. I'm going to talk to 2 new people. I'm going to introduce, I'm going to follow up with 2. So if you have some structure to it, again, I don't need to stay the whole time. If it's a company event, I can show my face. Thinking ahead of time, what's my purpose, and then how can I execute that so that it's introvert friendly, as I call it, So it's not like such a drain. But I think we do need to remember we need other people.
%. And one of the hacks that I like to use is, if you're good friends with, I'm good friends with our CEO. So when we go to meetings, I always tell him to introduce me to at least 2 people, because he's extroverted, like super extroverted. He could talk to you about any time.
Doing that.
So,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's amazing because it eliminates that first beginning part where you feel awkward. And then he's going on and on doing 3 to 5 minutes and then dishes off to me. And then I can have that one-on-one. One of the things with the one-on-one, because I want people to understand this, when I read your book, and then I began to be a leader and practice what you wrote, is how powerful coaching is and how amazing the one-on-one is when you do it right. Why is that a superpower for introverts, the one-on-one?
Well, that's just what they report as being very, very comfortable, because it is not superficial. It is like getting to know people deeper. You know what I'm saying? It's like you find that a lot of introverts will say to you that they don't have tons of friends, but the friends they have they're deep connections. And I think
yes.
And that translates to the workplace. I think you get to know people at not just like, how's the weather, but you really understand what makes them tick and how that really helps us from a performance standpoint. We know that what keeps people in organizations, Gallup tells us that, right, all the time. It's the boss. That's one of the top reasons. And having a purpose is another one up there. And so how do we know that if we're a leader or a team member? How to get the best out of our team members is to really get to know what keeps them there, floats their boat. What do they want to be challenged with next, And we don't just do that by just talking chit chat. Yes, it's important to talk about sports teams, but then go deeper, kind of schedule, really make that time intentional, about getting to know people. I wanted to say one more thing about another hack about networking, because you made me think about this when you mentioned your CEO introducing you. And I came upon this sort of just by happenstance. And I was at an event and there was a very quiet person next to me. I assumed that she was introverted. And then I saw another woman who I didn't know. It was a professional women's event. And she had a name tag. So I introduced the woman next to me to the other woman, who I had no idea who she was, but I knew she had a name tag. And the 2 of them started talking. So I said, well, that's another way for introverts to kind of get out of those long conversations that you're not necessarily sure. They often how to extricate yourself. The extroverts will just say, oh, I got to go mingle, and they'll kind of move away, right? But the introverts are like,
right.
So that was an interesting sort of that it came upon. And then Dr. Ivan Meisner, who I had on my podcast, The Introvert Ally last season, he talked about the open 2s and 3s. Have you ever heard of that technique?
No, tell me about that.
Well, it goes both ways. It goes for the people that are, when you're coming to a group, you want to make sure that you're not closing off talking to the person. You want to stand at kind of like a 45-degree angle. And when you're looking to enter a group, look for those open 2s and 3s, because it's much easier to do that than you can imagine when you're trying to enter a group where the people are just facing each other directly, it's a little seems a little more not inviting, right? Not uninviting. I'm not thinking of the word, but when you're just standing, I'm just a little bit open, and this goes for any. Like even a tough conversation like that, by the way, you don't want to be head on. It's like the umpire and the, and the referee
Right.
and the team manager kind of going at each other. No, it can be a little more of an aggressive stance. So in this case, it's much more open. So I just thought that was a great, and I've been looking when I've been to groups lately, and it does work to think about either entering or making yourself more accessible to more people in the room.
Yeah, that's so good. That's a great one. I want to ask you kind of a fun question here. If you had to pick one thing that introverted leaders do that often surprises their colleagues or superiors, if they're in, middle management or whatever, what's that one thing you think that surprises them?
Okay, well, let's see. What comes to mind just off the top of my head is when an introvert will go on and on and on talking about something that they're passionate. And you think,
Yes, that's so true. Yes.
right? Isn't that true? So it's like, wait a second. This person hasn't talked more than one or two syllables to me, but I asked them some question about gardening, and they went on about your rose bush for 20 minutes.
Right.
So
Yes.
again, is the key to try to figure out people and what excites them and what interests them. And they will go on and on. In fact, I have to laugh. My husband, as I've talked about in a lot of programs, is extremely introverted. And my daughters, who are not so much, will laugh to each other. They'll talk about conversations with Dad when they went on trips together, and he'd be like talking forever in the car. And they're like, we couldn't get him to shut up because he loves to like travel more
Right.
and talk where they're going. And they're like rolling their eyes, but they're laughing because they never hear him talk so much, but he loves going traveling in the car on, out west specifically. So it's just really interesting that if you can kind of hit that button, that would be one.
Yeah, that's
one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question.
And I want to, like, we have CEOs listening and a lot of tech startup founders and stuff. So how can they, in their organization, create a more introvert-friendly culture?
Well, first of all, it starts with them, right? It starts with themselves. I think we know from great leaders that old expression, and I think it was Aristotle, know thyself. And the best leaders really are very transparent, whether they're introvert or extrovert, about who they are, what their strengths are, what their liabilities are. And they are authentic and vulnerable and share that with their teams. So I think that's really a huge step forward. I think, one of the things we started doing during the pandemic was we were able to access senior leaders who we couldn't get before, like CEOs, like you mentioned, the kind of leaders who were so busy before, but then they were stuck home. So it was kind of interesting. They would get on our Zoom calls and the discussions on introverted leadership, and they would share and they were still doing these fireside chats about what their journey was to get to where they are. And they were very open about that. And people were and I found this throughout the years, people are so inspired by that and so encouraged to hear people who, particularly introverted leaders, in particular. So I think being transparent is key. Then in the book that we did the research on called Introvert-Friendly Workplaces, we looked at a number of different practices and everything from hiring and retention, as well as leadership development. So you mentioned coaching, we mentioned workplace design. So there are many different, and they're not always large changes. They could be tweaks, like having a space, for instance, in the work environment for introverts to go to have quiet time, and not have it be taken over by the storeroom. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It's like those kinds of things, flexibility, the chance to focus, all of those things, not having, really checking ourselves on what we're looking when we are bringing people into the organization. Do they have the competencies to do the job, or are they just people we want to have a beer with? And we might say that we're fair and open, but I think that having the introvert lens can be very positive in terms of making sure that you're not eliminating, as I said, between 20 and 60% of the population. So just having that introvert awareness, like you did, you had your aha for yourself, and then I'm sure you're sharing it with other people as you bring that lens into the workplace. And we have a lot of specific techniques which I can answer, but if people want to read the book, they can get a lot of practical ideas. As you know, I'm all about practice.
Yes. That's what the book is full of. That's why I said everyone has to get it. It's the brand new third edition. It's below. When you think of an extroverted leader, and I think a lot of them don't even think of like the workplace. Like you said, I can easily go to any place and walk around, and you see the picnic tables where the garden section is at, on the little patio, and you'll see like an introvert or two sitting out there. They'll have the bookcases with the library section, and it's quiet, and where there's no music, and I can pick out one or two introverts there. It's so interesting to see that. And yet I'll ask a leader and they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know that." I'm like, "Yeah, here's your introverts right here. You could easily pick them all out." How do you bring awareness? Like if I'm an extroverted leader, how do I bring awareness to understanding, the practical days of what an introvert, what an introvert is, or what they do, or how they act? Is there a way to be compassionate towards an introvert?
Well, I've seen it, and we're allies now. There's a new term for us, or relatively new, that extroverts can be allies. Many introverts will tell you, I get appreciation not just from me, but my extroverted colleagues who take the time to speak up for introverts. It's really getting the language and the awareness into the zeitgeist, if you will, of a company culture. So, for instance, if you are setting a meeting now, you say, you know what, you mention it. Like, in the meeting, we're going to have some space so the introverts can also have time. You kind of throw it into the language, right? Mm-hmm. You make it not like something to be ashamed of, which a lot of introverts have come into the world with that because they are ignorant, because they're unaware. And I don't say ignorant, but they're unaware. But you make it something to be celebrated. It's kind of fun now. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I've had several people in recent months say to me that they took an assessment, which, by the way, that's another way for people to start to get educated. There's plenty of free stuff online. They can read my books. There are many books out there now there's really probably no excuse not to understand at least the basics, right, of this personality. But as you know, it takes a while to kind of digest it and make it part of your being. And I think having discussions with your family, even. The kids are learning about it in school, which I'm very pleased about. In fact, one of the introverted leaders told me recently that his daughter just educated him on it because she did a whole unit at school about it. I was like, oh, that's great. So that we use that in our family as a common language. Dad needs his introvert time now. Or, even my granddaughter, I'm pretty sure, is an introvert. Don't want to label her, but she needs that time to be alone. And how liberating it is to see her parents give her that space and not do what a lot of parents did for many generations was, come out and play with everybody, get out of your room. And, there's a balance there. But I think that we have never really accepted in our society and in our educational systems introverts. So it is a learning process for all of us to step into this. But I was going to say, the funny thing is recently I've had people who are extroverted say, oh, they seem disappointed that their scores, let's say, came out on an assessment that they're extroverted and they wanted to be introverts because it's cool to be introverted. I don't think you're really getting this.
Yeah. It's so wild how there's like yin and yang. It's a compliment. You have to have it. Like I said, I'm friends with our CEO. He loves that I slow down and I'm strategized. That helps him because he's so fast. He speaks really well. He can talk really good. He can walk into a room, give a speech. He doesn't have to prepare. But then when it comes to strategy, he has that ability to be able to recognize introverted superpowers. And I think that's something that, whatever it may be, your superpower is find those. Take the time to take the introvert out to lunch, go have drinks, do whatever, and get to know them really well and find their superpower. You can ask them, like you said, if you start asking them about their job and they light up and they talk to you for an hour, you've hit the right button. And that's awesome. And that's where I want to get in. Well,
No. I was going to say, that's my colleague Sam Horn calls it the eyebrow test when you see their eyebrows go up. That's good. That's another good way to judge it. I wanted to say something about you and your manager, which what I really like about what he's done is he respects you and he's not trying to right of you. And what we found with those partnerships of the introverts and extroverts, one of the areas we called it kind of tongue in cheek, accept the alien. You're never going to know exactly really what it's like to be an introvert. I'm never going to be able to totally step into an introvert's shoes at all. But we all have some of that within us and vice versa, But the key is to accept each other. And that, I mean, I know it sounds kind of cliche, accept each other, but we're not going to change each other. I mean, we've got to accept, we know that if we've been in life a little bit, you don't change other people, but you do accept what they bring. And I think that's the beauty. And the people that, I once did a workshop years ago, and it was one of those that I wish that I had never taken the job. And I remember it was a political company, but you learn, right? You live and learn. But this manager got me up there, and I thought we were on the same page. And turns out she wanted to turn her sales team into extroverts. I mean, that was the agenda. And she was, the implicit message was introversion is not good. I was like, I had to basically change everything and push back tremendously on this. But I think there are still managers who are, hopefully not that many. I think it's just more like just being open, saying what you're about and modeling what you do well. Mm-hmm. You also made a point about there's a spectrum, Jason. That's exactly, what we're all about is having all of these qualities within us. And so many introverted leaders will say to me, they'll say, my team, Jennifer, thinks that I'm an extrovert and I can't convince them otherwise. I am so introverted. But I have learned to use these behaviors of extroversion, being out there, connecting with people, networking. But I must have my recharge time. I have to have quiet time. I get away from people. I'm going to manage that. I'm not going to go to all the evening dinners. I'll go to what I have to. I manage that. But they really think that so it's like, okay, whatever. I'm not going to change their mind. But, in a way, as long as they're comfortable, these leaders, with how they're managing, that's great. The problem becomes when A, we're not aware, and B, when we go too much over to the other side. And extroverts will tell you the same thing. If they don't have the stimulation, they get deflated, and you're not going to get the best out of them. So again, that's where we need to know each other's strengths so that, we can plug people into those opportunities where they get to use those introverted strengths versus the extroverted strength as well. We got to think about both.
I love that. And one of the things that you talk in your book, and we'll take this next 10, 15 minutes and go into these, the 4 Ps, because what happened when I started using the 4 Ps, prepare, presence, push, and practice, and we'll get into each of those, at the tail end of this podcast. But when I started using them, people thought I was extroverted, like you just said. Because if you're preparing, if you've researched, you planned, you're present, you're focusing on the moment, you have eye contact, you're pushing yourself to step out of your comfort zone, initiate contact, and then you're practicing, you're constantly refining your skills and seeking feedback, you look like an extrovert then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
or an introvert. Or an introvert. So people say the same to you. And you come off, you have enthusiasm too. Some people will say, well, introverts, another myth. Introverts don't have any energy, that kind of thing. But
yes.
there's all there's all kinds of extroverts. So we have to be careful of not, labeling people too much and use it as one, as I say, one lens to look through. There's many other lenses to look through. I understand people.
And we did the prepare pretty good in the meetings. So I want to focus on the presence. And you talked about the one-on-ones and all that. But nowadays, no one's present hardly. We even have to do apps to make ourselves be present. And as an introvert, something that I've learned is if I practice presence with people, like in my head, be like, make eye contact, really focus, listen. I can do that pretty easily as an introvert. And it becomes very meaningful to the other person, having that conversation, being present.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think engaged listening, having focused conversations is something that extroverts will tell you they really admire. When they talk, they admire about introverts. They'll say, that's the thing that's stuck. There are all these people around. This person just focused on me. They really got it because they took the time to listen. They were a great sounding board. It's totally true, though, about we all have the challenge now with our phones, and everything seems to be done through the phone. Like I was walking behind a group in the park yesterday, and I saw them all on their phones. I was like, this sucks. What is going on here, right? And one of the young men, then they broke up. They were talking very quietly. I was like, they could be introverted, so I was just observing them. And the young man, once they finished, they were done with their outing. I asked one of the young men, and by the way, they were all different ages. And I said to the young man, so what were you guys just doing over there? He goes, we were doing a Pokemon walk. And I'm not even sure what Pokemon's all about, but they're on some mission, right? But they had their phones So it suited them. I haven't guessed. The number of them were probably introverted. They were gamers, and it was the phone. But I think the phone in the negative sense can just totally take us away from being with people, for sure. And I think that is one of the things.
I feel like sorry, go ahead.
No, go on. It's okay.
I feel like the presence, if you understand it as an introvert and you understand it as a superpower, because we feel as introverts, we can't put the cape on. We're not the hero. We're not the person. But these things, these 4 Ps are superpowers if you work on them. And they're easy to work on as an introvert. That's why your book is so powerful. If I practice presence, I set myself apart from a lot of other leaders just by showing that I care.
You really do. And I want to also say, in times that we're in now, or, the world, it's very important. And I got this feedback a lot about introverts, to be calm and to breathe. And when we can do that, when introverts can lead the way with that, where they're not freaking out and thinking about, what's going to happen and talking out all their anxiety, which extroverts can do when they're anxious, they'll talk a lot. Have you noticed? That happen, whereas introverts might withdraw, but it's still important to be present. And I think we talk a lot about in the book about breathing, and how that it's very difficult to be somewhere else when you're concentrating on your breathing. And that's whether you're public speaking, whether you're having an anxious conversation, whether the world's going on around you and you're having a crisis at work. People look to introverted leaders for that calm and that just kind of, stability. So I think that's where presence comes in, that you may have seen with some of your colleagues as well.
Yeah, and the last 2, I want to go into these before we close. Push is really important, and I use that all the time. I'll be like, Jason, just it's time to push yourself. If I feel, because I know that feeling of being hesitant, there's a genuine, if it's like a tiger's going to eat me or something like that, or there's danger, safety, there's a reason. It's 2:00 in the morning. I'm not going to walk down that alley. That's a comfort zone thing that, that's a fear thing. But there's this fake fear that I have as an introvert that I have to understand that I have to purposely, or at least try almost every day, to step out of my comfort zone. That's why I do these podcasts. This is one of the things. Like today, I'm stepping out of my comfort zone and I'm talking to somebody. But it's important for me to give you the honor because of your book helped change me as a leader. And I believe a lot of what I have going in my life is being the success that I have is based off of these principles. So it's important for me to step out of my comfort zone and have a conversation, reach out to you and have this conversation. And none of this would have happened if I wouldn't have practiced push, if that makes sense.
Well, kudos to you. No, it totally practice push. I like getting the 2 Ps together there.
Yeah, they work similar. You could prepare and be present, Yeah, you can prepare and practice. Yeah, they work all together.
They do actually work together. I need to give some more thought to that. Yeah, totally stepping out of your comfort zone is we oftentimes use that expression, but pushing just enough so you're uncomfortable but not in pain. You know what I'm saying? Like if you think about it, we're going out and the next day you're feeling sore from the gym or whatever. But yeah, I think that's really important. And I think I've seen that. Where it came from was, we got the 4 Ps really from introverted leaders. I'm doing tons of interviews and observations with introverted leaders. What do they do that makes them so effective? And that was one of the things they do is they stretch themselves. They don't like accept that, okay, well, I don't really, I'm comfortable where I'm at. I'm going to just keep growing and changing. And that's why, looping back to what I was saying about people saying, oh, you're not an introvert, you're an extrovert, because they've refined those skills. They're great public speakers. Introverts make tremendous presentation because they're so prepared, but they also push themselves, to do that. And then they take a break. I have had lots of podcasts. I've been on a lot of podcasts, and many of the hosts are introverts, and they say the thing you do, which is it stretches me. I learn in the best way too with one-on-one. I engage with people deeply like you do. But then it'd be easier not to do this, but I'm learning so much and it's helping me grow my business or whatever the purpose is. So yeah, stretching is, they're constantly doing that. Now, what I would like to see on the flip side, and I'm sure many introverts would, is to see extroverts be more intentional in general about right. Ones I have seen that are the allies like myself that are, really understanding that introversion is so important to adapt for all of us, those kind of qualities. They're doing that, like, for instance, an example would be the woman who was talking to you about how she was always the first person to speak in a meeting. And she basically had to sit on her hands, but she counted like to make sure that at least like 4 people in the meeting got to speak before she did. It was a push for her. It was hard for her. But she said, I learned so much. And then people had their voices in the room that I never heard before. And I need to keep doing that. And that also leaders do that, by the way, really good leaders. They don't speak first, right? They wait to hear. But for her, that was such a switch, such a push. But then as she kept doing that, just became part of how she operated in the meetings, which of course the introverts appreciated. But even more than that, they got richer performance results from hearing from everybody. So I think it's not just for introverts. Everybody needs to look at what can be my push today. Like Eleanor Roosevelt said, yeah, you should do something that makes you uncomfortable.
Yes, I love that. And that leads us to our last one. We'll close out of this one is practice. What I learned with practice is, and I've talked to a lot of introverted leaders and help take introverted leaders and, help them progress like you have. I mean, you've done, thousands more leaders that you've influenced with your book. But one of the things that I've learned with practice is that it's easier for us than extroverts. It's easier for me to be disciplined than it is for my friend. He's running around like boom, 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 boom. There's nothing wrong with that. I can go to the gym. It's easier for me to discipline myself to go to the gym. It's easier for me to discipline myself to go take a walk. It's easier for me I can even thrive on a schedule, where an extrovert feels restricted, so practicing is something that, whether it's, and I encourage young men to get into a martial art or something like that if they're introverted, it's something that they can practice, a skill that gets them out of their comfort zone. And if you practice it and you commit to the practice as an introvert, you're going to be hockey stick up, as far as just by being consistently practiced. It's the compound effect,
I love what you said. It is the compound effect, and the Atomic Habits author writes about just a little bit every day, right? Also, extroverts can do it. And, it's the only way I've gotten books as an extrovert written is to have that discipline that I've learned from all of you too, from, having an accountability partner. There are things that extroverts can do to achieve results without getting distracted, following the lead of their introverts. You're absolutely right.
Yes, you are, sure.
So important. I think that's why the 4 Ps has really resonated with introverts too, because it's a structure, right?
Well, what I liked about practice is refining. I love that word. You talk about regularly refining your skills. And so what does refinement look like? So I had to tell myself, what does that look like? Having a coaching conversation, a one-on-one with somebody. How can I refine this and make it better? I'm talking too much. Let me ask more questions. Well, what questions do I want to ask? The next step is, how can I get the real answer out of the person instead of a fake answer? That's refining, So that's the practice in an introvert is I think the 4 Ps are all superpowers. If an introvert will do them.
Yeah, right. Well, they'll follow your lead after listening to the podcast.
Yes, buy your book.
Yeah, buy the book. Wouldn't hurt. Listen to our podcast, Introvert Ally. I love how you used your own examples throughout this. It makes it so much more powerful, and it validates that, you all have the answer already.
Good thing. One of the things that I found that you said is if I get the endorphins going, even just a little walk, like you said, you're walking in the park, even getting in nature, hiking is really important for me. And I'm not eating crappy food. Those 2 things have changed my depression. And I talk to a lot of introverts and I've mentioned this, and because a lot of introverts will just go with the flow and they'll just eat whatever. They'll eat the pizza. They'll just sit in their office all day long, not go for walks, being that in the shell. Have you seen that? Like, I mean, when you talk with introverts or you've seen introverts, they're kind of not eating good, not exercising, kind of just going home and withdrawing?
No, I haven't seen that, but I will say what we have seen with remote work is that that's a caveat. And also with the work and quiet influence, that too much of a strength or a propensity can be a weakness. So I think I could see that could possibly definitely, I think that we found, the only kind of couple years we had there to take a look at was affecting everybody with mental health, with COVID.
Yes.
But I think when we did studies, it was interesting for remote work, where introverts said, yes, this is the best thing ever. It was like 98% out of a study of 240 introverts. And as time went on, those numbers went down a little bit. People they got lonely. So if you could correlate loneliness with some of those non-productive behaviors, no, I think looking at diet is really important. I just did that myself, and it's made a big difference in my life too. I thought I was eating well, but not as well as you could, and it makes a difference in your energy.
Yes, yeah, no, I know. It's so hard. There's so much amazing things that taste delicious. I was just in Paris and, a croissant every day. It's so funny. I lost weight. I guess it's just the walking around, but
You were walking. You
no, I
were
ate
walking.
desserts. I ate all the desserts. So bad.
No,
Well,
you don't.
Jennifer, this has been amazing. We've done an hour. This is awesome, and I appreciate your work. And like you said, you've personally helped me and promoted who I am as a leader, and so I owe that a lot to your book. I use it kind of like a leadership Bible, and it allows me, and I've helped other introverted leaders all based off of your book. So I want to give you kudos to that, and thank you for taking the time to write it, and for all the people that you've helped. And I know this podcast is going out to 100,000 leaders. We're going to help some others too.
And you are doing such incredible work on so many fronts, and you're a leader in the movement, in the introvert revolution. So I owe a lot to you as well. And thank you so much. It's been an honor to be on your podcast. Thank you.